There's no doubt that Tekken 8 is going to be a huge success for the series, and it's going to usher in a whole new generation of Tekken players. With all these new players playing Tekken for the first time, there's going to be a lot of questions going around. And one of the biggest questions new players have coming into Tekken, or any fighting game really, is what controller should they use? This can be very intimidating for new players, as everyone seems to have a different opinion on what controller you should use, and a lot of new players actually think you need to invest in a fight stick to succeed. And while that obviously isn't true, there still seems to be a lot of confusion among new players. So I thought I'd clear it all up with this video. Today I'll be going over the 3 main controller types people use in Tekken 8, and any other fighting game really. I'll be stating multiple pros and cons, and some tips and tricks, and just general information that'll get you started. So, let's start with the most popular controller option, and that is the pad. So, the pad. This can be just a standard PlayStation or Xbox controller, or a more specific controller made specifically for fighting games. But the general idea is the same on all of them. On the pad, people generally use the D-pad, not the analog stick, and have access to face buttons and shoulder buttons. The pad is generally considered to be the most comfortable option for play, and it makes sense, right? These controllers are designed by billion-dollar companies to make for the most enjoyable gaming experience possible, and you're most likely already familiar with one of these controllers. They're very light, and are easily the most portable option, whether you're taking it to a friend's house or traveling to tournaments with it. It's very convenient. Tekken is a 4-button fighter, and these controllers generally have 4 face buttons, so it works very nicely if you use the standard Tekken control scheme. I know some players like having the 4 buttons all being next to each other in a line, and if that's you, you're probably going to be out of luck here. We generally have 2 triggers on the left and right of the controller, which gives you some space for button mapping. I think in Tekken 8 the default to do a heat burst is the right trigger, but you can of course change that and others to whatever you want. If you struggle to press 1+4 or 2+3 like I do, then you can map these combinations out to one of the 4 triggers. And you just have a lot of options here. Now if you want more than 4 binds, you're going to have to look at other options as well. Some pads are made specifically for fighting games, and these have extra face buttons, so you can look into that if you're interested. The D-pad allows for pretty easy and fast inputs, but you are limited to the speed of your thumb, which can be difficult if you play certain characters. Like, I don't know how some of you guys play Mishimos on pad. And this brings us to the pad's main con, which is durability. I've played a lot of fighting games, and it's generally just an accepted truth that you are going to go through a lot of controllers if you're a competitive player, especially if you play high execution characters. Most of these controllers were not designed for wave dash and 6 electric combos, and tons of people are way more aggressive with their controller than they realize. I can say for me personally, I've worn out a PS4 controller through playing Geese in Tekken 7, so I can only imagine what it's like for people who played more complicated characters like Akuma and Kazuya. I wouldn't worry too much about this unless you know you'll be labbing high execution stuff and playing super competitively, but it's definitely worth noting, and it's the main setback of the pad, I think. Anyway, let's move on. The second controller type we're going to be talking about is another one that intimidates a lot of people. A lot of people don't really know anything about it, but it's reserved for PC players unless you get an adapter, and that is, of course, the keyboard. The keyboard is a staple of PC gaming and offers an unconventional but increasingly popular style of play. Its advantage lies in the precision of digital inputs, which when it comes to execution is unmatched. It doesn't matter how fast your thumb is. You will never beat a good Mishima player in execution if they're playing on keyboard. In addition to this, the nature of using keyboard for inputs means you have access to a ton of options that are literally impossible on other controller methods, like holding forward and back at the same time, or sidestepping while crouching. The execution benefits are just insane on keyboard, and this is why a ton of people consider this play method the best and the easiest. Digital inputs are really just insane. The keyboard also allows for an incredible level of customization, as you have way more buttons than any other controller. You literally have 104 keys if you're using a standard keyboard, so you can map every possible button combination and still have tons of keys to spare. So, what's the catch? Keyboard is basically exclusively for PC players, and essentially locks you out of going to most tournaments. Keyboard play isn't supported by default for the console versions of these games, and while I hear there are some adapters that could work, they're very expensive and don't even work all the time from what I've heard. And even if they did, it's a lot of hassle. If you're interested in competing in tournaments, you likely won't be able to use your keyboard, as almost all Tekken 8 tournaments are going to be held on console, and even if they weren't, it's not very practical to go around with the keyboard and play from it on your lap. It just wasn't designed for that. But if you like the digital inputs for directions, there are other options available, specifically the hitbox. This is basically a keyboard with bigger buttons, but it functions almost exactly the same and has the same benefits, and it'll work on console. Now there's actually a lot of debate about this controller, as a large part of the community blatantly thinks it gives you an unfair advantage, and there's even been talks of banning the controller in tournament play. I'm going to save talking about this for a future video though. Just know the keyboard and hitbox have some big benefits. And finally, let's talk about the option that's seen the most in pro play, and that is the fight stick, also known as the arcade stick. Now, the fight stick is often thought to be the best control method by newcomers to fighting games, as they see that a huge amount of professionals use this option. And this is simply untrue. The fight stick is just popular in veteran players, as that's what they're most comfortable with. A lot of these players grew up playing at arcades, and just feel that fighting games aren't the same without that feeling. The fight stick features multiple big buttons which feel great to press and allows a lot of room to map inputs, and the lever allows for some very easy inputs like quarter circle and whatnot. I know a lot of people struggle to do inputs on pad, but it's definitely a lot easier to do on a lever once you get used to it. These fight sticks are very customizable and moddable, so you have a lot of options in terms of lever types and button types. There's a couple downsides to these, however. Number one is the price. They're very expensive, like triple the cost of a standard pad. And they also have the highest learning curve out of any control option. Unlike on the keyboard and the controller, you have to get used to finding the exact place the lever needs to go to find a certain directional inputs. It took me weeks to get down-back inputs on my stick without looking at the controller, and that's very important to note. You'll have to invest a lot of time, probably months or maybe even more, to feel fully comfortable with this controller for the first time. And this is just my personal experience, but I know so many people, including myself, who've been excited to learn a fighting game and impulsively buys a fight stick, just to realize how much work it is and then stop using it and let it collect dust. This isn't to say it's a bad control option. Like the rest, it has its pros and its cons, but it's definitely the one that requires the most investment, in both time and money. But hey, if you think it looks cool and want to learn it, don't let me or anyone else stop you. Go for it. And yeah, those are the 3 main controller methods for Tekken, and any fighting game really. I'm planning on making individual videos with some more in-depth tips for each control method, so stay tuned for that. If you guys enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. Only about 4% of my viewers are subscribed, and I'm really working hard to get a lot of Tekken 8 content, so if you're interested in character guides, discussion videos, analysis, and more, please consider subscribing. Anyway, hope you all have a great day, and I will see you later.